The trucks left first. That was what the wounded men remembered, not the shelling, not the smoke, not the broken glass scattered across the farmhouse floor. They remembered the engines starting outside, one after another, until the whole road seemed to tremble beneath them. Inside the farmhouse, 7 American soldiers lay where the medics had placed them. One man had a bandaged leg. Another could not lift his shoulder. A third kept asking for water in a voice so low the others had to lean toward him to hear it. Dust fell from the ceiling every time German artillery landed beyond the orchard, but the men were not listening to the guns anymore. They were listening to their own company leave. A private named Samuel Reed turned his head toward the doorway. "Are they coming back?" No one answered. Down the road, Captain Nathaniel Price was pulling his company out under pressure. On paper, the withdrawal would look clean. Enemy fire increasing. Position no longer tenable. Company preserved for continued operations. It sounded like command judgment. It sounded like survival. But reports can hide what rooms cannot. Because in that farmhouse, the wounded were still alive when the last truck rolled away. A medic had asked to go back. A rescue party had not been sent before dark. And when the report finally reached George Patton, he did not stop at the line that said the company had withdrawn successfully. He stopped at what the report did not explain. Where were the wounded? Patton did not punish Captain Price for losing a farmhouse. He punished him for leaving men behind and calling it leadership. The farmhouse had not been chosen because it was safe. It had been chosen because it was still standing. By mid-afternoon, the walls were cracked, the windows were gone, and the orchard behind it was blackened where German shells had torn through the frozen ground. The house sat near a narrow road that cut between 2 fields, close enough to the front to be useful, and far enough behind the lead platoons to become a temporary aid point when the wounded began coming back. Corporal James Bell was the first medic through the door. He did not ask whether the place was clean. He asked where the light was best. Then he pushed a table against the wall, laid blankets over the floorboards, and started sorting men by who could walk, who could be carried, and who had to be watched every minute. Private Samuel Reed was placed near the kitchen doorway. He had dirt across one side of his face and kept trying to sit up even after Bell told him not to. Near him lay Private Eddie Nolan, whose breathing came in short, angry bursts, as if he resented every breath for taking effort. 2 more men were dragged in before the hour was done, then 3 after that. Outside, Captain Nathaniel Price walked the road with his field glasses in one hand and a map case under his arm. Price was not blind to danger. He could see the German fire walking closer. He could hear machine gun bursts from the tree line beyond the orchard. He knew the road behind him was narrow, and he knew that if German artillery found the crossing, his company could be trapped in pieces. Riflemen in the ditches, trucks on the road, wounded men in a house that could not move. A captain in that position had to think about the company. That was the burden. If he stayed too long, he might lose everyone. If he withdrew too fast, he might save the formation and abandon the men who needed it most. Price told himself there was no clean choice. Then he began making the choice look cleaner than it was. He ordered the outer platoons to prepare to pull back. He told the drivers to keep engines ready. He told his runners to pass the word quickly and quietly. Inside the farmhouse, Bell heard the first truck start. He stepped outside and found Price near the gate. "Sir," Bell said, "I still have men who can't walk." Price did not look toward the doorway. "How many?" 7. For the first time that afternoon, the retreat became more than a maneuver. It became a question of who counted. Captain Price did not write the first report like a confession. He wrote it like an officer. That was what made it dangerous. The language was calm. The sentences were clean. The timeline appeared orderly enough for any tired staff officer to read quickly and move on. Enemy fire increasing along the orchard line. Forward position exposed to flanking pressure. Withdrawal ordered to preserve company strength. Vehicles displaced before the road became untenable. Casualties to be accounted for after reorganization. On paper, it sounded like control. It sounded like a captain who had seen a bad situation forming and acted before it destroyed his command. No one reading the first page would have smelled the farmhouse dust. No one would have heard the engine starting outside while wounded men lay inside. No one would have known that Corporal Bell had stood near the gate and told Price plainly that 7 men could not walk. That detail did not appear. Not in the opening summary, not in the movement explanation, not in the first casualty note. Price did not write, "Wounded remained in farmhouse at time of withdrawal." He wrote, "Casualties pending recovery after displacement." It was a softer sentence, a cleaner sentence, a sentence that made abandoned men sound like a scheduling problem. By the time the report reached battalion, the company had already pulled into a safer position and reorganized behind a low ridge. Men were counting ammunition, drivers were checking fuel, sergeants were trying to rebuild squads from whoever had come out of the road, the ditch, the orchard, and the smoke. Price moved among them with the exhausted look of a man who had survived a hard decision, and maybe part of him believed that was true. That was the uncomfortable part. Most bad command decisions are not made by men twirling mustaches in the dark. They are made by men under pressure who begin by saving time, then saving face, then saving the version of events they need others to believe. Price had saved the company formation, but he had not saved the whole company, because 7 names still belonged to him: Reed, Nolan, Carver, Benson, Miller, Dawson, Hayes. Their rifles were not stacked with the others. Their helmets were not counted on the roadside. Their voices did not answer when the platoon sergeants called the rolls. And still, the report moved upward with its polished little phrase, "Casualties pending recovery after displacement." A report can make a retreat look orderly, but it cannot make wounded men disappear. It can only delay the moment someone asks where they are. Corporal James Bell did not ask Captain Price to hold the farmhouse. He knew better than that. Bell had spent enough time under fire to understand when a position was beginning to fold. He could hear it in the pattern of shells landing closer. He could see it in the way riflemen outside stopped standing and began crouching along the walls. He could read it in the faces of drivers who kept glancing down the road, measuring how much space they had left before the road became a trap. Bell was not asking Price to be reckless. He was asking him to count the men who could not run. 7, Bell said again. Price looked past him toward the farmhouse door. "Can any of them walk?" 2 with help. 5 need stretchers. "We don't have time for 5 stretchers." "Then give me 4 men and 1 truck." Price's eyes moved sharply back to him. "Corporal, this company is pulling out now." Bell kept his voice steady. "Yes, sir, but those men are still alive." That sentence should have changed the discussion. It did not. Price stepped closer, lowering his voice as if the problem were Bell's failure to understand command pressure. "If I stop this movement, I may lose the road. If I lose the road, I lose the company." Bell looked toward the trucks. Engines were running. Men were climbing aboard. The formation was not yet gone. The road was not yet closed. The moment was dangerous, but it still existed. That was the truth Bell would remember later. There had been a window. Not a safe window, not an easy one, but a real one. "Sir," Bell said, "then let me stay with them." Price shook his head. "I need every medic with the company." "Then who is going back for them?" For the first time, Price did not answer immediately. Behind Bell, another shell landed beyond the orchard. Dirt lifted into the air and scattered across the yard. Someone shouted for the last truck to move. The decision hardened around Price like armor. "We'll request evacuation once we're clear." Bell stared at him. "Once we're clear, sir, they may not be." Price's face changed then. Not with guilt, with anger at being forced to hear the sentence aloud. "That is enough, Corporal." Bell understood the order. He also understood what it meant. He ran back into the farmhouse, not to save the men yet, but to tell them a lie he could not fully believe. "Hold on," he said. "We're coming back." Outside, the trucks began to move. Bell did not have time to explain the order. That was another cruelty of it. He came back through the farmhouse door with his helmet low, his jaw tight, and a roll of bandages still clenched in one hand. The men on the floor looked at him the way wounded men look at a medic, not because they expect miracles, but because the medic is the last proof that the army has not forgotten them. Private Samuel Reed saw Bell's face first. He knew before Bell spoke. "They're moving us?" Reed asked. Bell knelt beside him and checked the dressing that did not need checking. "Hold on," Bell said. It was the same sentence he had used outside, but inside the farmhouse it sounded thinner. Behind him, the trucks were already shifting into line. Boots hit the road. Tailgates slammed. Someone shouted for the last men to load up. Private Eddie Nolan tried to push himself onto one elbow. "Doc?" Bell looked at him. "We're coming back." No one in the room asked when. Maybe they were afraid of the answer. Bell left extra bandages, 2 canteens, and a morphine record tucked under a broken plate on the table, so whoever found them would know what had already been given. Then an officer shouted from outside, and Bell stood, because a corporal could argue only so long before the order swallowed him too. At the doorway, he turned once. 7 men looked back. That was the image that stayed with him. Not the smoke, not the shelling, their eyes. Then Bell was gone. For several seconds the farmhouse held only the sound of engines. Close at first, heavy, familiar, American. Then farther away, tires grinding over the road. Gears changing. Metal rattling over holes. Then less. Then almost nothing. Reed stared at the doorway until Private Carver, wounded himself, dragged across the floor and grabbed his sleeve. "Cellar," Carver whispered. Reed could not stand, so Carver pulled him by the jacket, inch by inch, toward the narrow cellar steps. Nolan helped push with one good arm. Dawson slid down first and cleared broken wood from the bottom. None of them called it bravery. There was no breath left for words, that large. They were simply men who had been left with one another, and that had become their whole army. Above them, dust shook loose from the ceiling. Somewhere outside, a German shell landed near the orchard. Reed closed his eyes and listened for the trucks again, but the road was quiet. That was when he understood. The company had not paused. It had gone. The first report did not reach Patton as a scandal. It reached him as paperwork. That was how many ugly things entered a headquarters. Not with shouting, not with blood on the floor, just carbon copies, typed summaries, radio logs, casualty sheets, and clean sentences written by men who knew how to make confusion look organized after the fact. Major Thomas Greer saw the problem before most others did. He had been checking the movement report against the casualty timeline when one line stopped him. Company displaced at 14:45. That was normal. Then he looked at the evacuation request. Wounded recovery requested after 1800. Greer read it again. More than 3 hours. 3 hours between the company clearing the area and the first formal request to recover wounded men who had been left in the farmhouse. At first, there were explanations. There are always explanations. Radio traffic was crowded. Enemy pressure was increasing. Roads were under observation. Units were reforming. Nobody had the full picture. But Greer kept reading. The problem did not shrink. It grew. Corporal Bell's statement said the wounded were alive when the company pulled out. It said he had informed Captain Price that 7 men could not walk. It said he had requested men and a truck. It said no rescue party was ordered before the withdrawal. Then came the sentence Greer could not ignore. No rescue party was requested before dark. Greer took the packet to Patton. Patton did not read it quickly. He read the first report, then the radio log, then Bell's statement, then the casualty list. He moved from one sheet to the next without changing expression. That was when the room began to feel colder. A furious man can be managed. A quiet Patton reading details could not. He tapped one finger on the timeline. Company clear at 14:45. No one answered. He moved his finger lower. Wounded recovery requested after 1800. Still no one answered. Then Patton looked up. Where were they between those two times? The question did not need volume. It needed an answer. Major Greer gave the only one the papers allowed. In the farmhouse, sir. Patton looked back down at the casualty list. 7 names. 7 men who had not vanished from the army just because a captain had moved his company down the road. Then Patton asked the next question. Who knew they were there? Greer hesitated. Captain Price was told, sir. Patton closed the folder. Not hard, not dramatically. Just enough for every man in the room to understand that the report had stopped being paperwork. It had become command failure. Captain Nathaniel Price entered the room, expecting to explain a withdrawal. He was prepared for that. He had rehearsed the words in his head on the walk over. Enemy pressure, exposed position, narrow road, risk of encirclement, company preservation. Any one of those phrases could sound reasonable, because each of them held a piece of the truth. But Patton was not interested in the piece that made Price look steady. He was looking at the part Price had left behind. The casualty timeline lay on the table. Beside it were the radio log, Bell's statement, and the first company report with its clean sentence circled in pencil. Casualties pending recovery after displacement. Price saw the circle before Patton spoke. That was when he understood this would not be a discussion about ground. Patton stood behind the table with both hands resting on the edge. You withdrew at 14:45. Yes, sir. You requested wounded recovery after 1800. Price's mouth tightened. Yes, sir. The road was under threat, and the company had to reorganize before. Patton cut him off without raising his voice. That was not the question. The room went still. Major Greer stood near the wall. Corporal Bell stood beside him, helmet in his hands, looking down at the floor as if he hated being part of what came next. Patton looked at Price again. Were the wounded alive when you left? Price did not answer quickly enough. And in a room like that, delay was already testimony. Patton turned his eyes to Bell. Corporal. Bell lifted his head. Yes, sir. They were alive. How many? 7, sir. Did you tell Captain Price? Yes, sir. Did you ask for men and a truck? Yes, sir. Were you allowed to take them? Bell swallowed. No, sir. Patton looked back at Price. Now the captain tried to build the explanation he had carried in with him. He spoke of shelling, road pressure, limited manpower, the possibility of losing the company if the movement stalled. None of it was nonsense. None of it was impossible. That was why Patton let him finish. Then Patton tapped the report. You wrote this like they were cargo to be collected later. Price's face changed. Sir, I made a command decision. Patton's reply came flat. No, you made a retreat. Then you made it look clean. No one moved. That was the punishment before the punishment. Because every officer in the room understood the line Patton had drawn. A captain could be forced from a farmhouse. He could be forced from a road. He could even be forced to leave ground he wanted to hold. But he could not leave living wounded men behind, delay the rescue, soften the language, and ask the army to call that leadership. Patton did not need a long speech to end Captain Price's command. He only needed the timeline. The withdrawal had been reported. The company had been cleared. The wounded had remained behind. And the rescue request had come too late to be explained away as confusion. Price was removed from company command before the next morning's orders were issued. There was no dramatic parade, no public humiliation in front of the whole division. Patton did not need theater. Theater was for men trying to make punishment look bigger than the facts. Here, the facts were large enough. The company would be placed under another officer. The report would be reviewed for accuracy. Casualty evacuation timing would be treated as a command priority, not an afterthought buried beneath movement language. Any withdrawal plan that left non-walking wounded in place would now require clear marking, immediate reporting, and a rescue order before the first clean sentence reached headquarters. Then Patton did something the staff remembered longer than the order itself. He had the casualty timeline read aloud. Not to shame the wounded, to shame the gap. Company clear. After 1800, wounded recovery requested. Between those two times sat the whole failure. Not German artillery, not the narrow road, not the farmhouse. The failure was the empty space where responsibility should have been. Corporal Bell was not praised like a hero in a newspaper. That was not Patton's way. But his statement was entered, his judgment was respected, and from that day forward, no officer in that staff room could pretend a medic's warning was just noise from a lower rank. Private Samuel Reed survived. So did some of the others. But survival did not erase what had happened. It only made the question harder to avoid. What does a wounded man hear when the trucks leave? He hears whether the army still claims him. That was the part Captain Price had forgotten. A captain can lose a road. He can lose a farmhouse. He can lose time, fuel, and ground. War takes those things from good men every day. But when a captain decides that living wounded men are a burden to be collected later, he has already lost something no map can restore. He has lost the right to command. Patton understood that better than most. Because an army does not hold together by speed alone. It does not hold together by flags, orders, or clean reports. It holds together because every man believes one thing when he falls. Someone will come back. And if a commander breaks that belief, Patton knew the enemy had not destroyed the unit. The commander had.